Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi and good morning. Tan Sri Dato, members of the board at MIER, our distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you all to this webinar on the 2022 budget, national budget. It was introduced in the Parliament last Friday last week. MIER is indeed privileged to conduct this webinar on a very important topic that has a very significant impact on all of us as Malaysians and as professionals and as members of the workforce. Today, the budget was launched, and it's a very big allocation that's been provided for by the Honourable Minister of Finance, Tengku Datuk Zafrul, and allocation was provided for about 332 billion ringgit. It's a very large allocation, and it's largely to address our issues we are facing now, issue of life and livelihood. These two very important matters, like because we have been impacted by the pandemic COVID-19, and because of that, there was, because of the effect on the economy, so on employment, unemployment, and also in terms of income, all of us in terms of livelihood. And of course, the budget has caused to address also the long-term concern of the 12th Malaysia Plan, which was also introduced last month. So we are indeed privileged today to have very distinguished speakers, if I can introduce them. First is my former colleague, Dr. Yogesh Varan. He's very well renowned in the Malaysian domestic circle among fellow economists. Was once Deputy Director General of the Economic Unit, dealing with macroeconomics, and then he was promoted to the General Ministry of Ministry of Commodities and Primary Industries, and now so he has got a law degree. I didn't know about that, Yogesh. You've been working hard to do your law degree now, so I was to your law. Congratulations to that. And Yogesh also, that Yogesh has been also has a master's degree from Manchester, and he has also. He's also a member of the board of several organizations, GLCs in particular. Because of his background, he was put in the several GLCs. And to name but a few, Syarikat Bekalan Air Selangor, Iskandar Regional Development Authority in Johor, and also Malaysian Timber Industry Board, among the few that relate to commodities. And we have also today another distinguished person, area of taxation, auditing, and accounting, is Farah Rosalie. She's now with the Ernst & Young, right, Farah? Ernst & Young, and you have over 20 years experience in this area. So I saw an article a few days ago. Good, it was a good article on taxation. I'm glad. And Farah has a degree in accounting, finance, from the University of Hull, UK. And also with us here is Dr. Hazri Adnan. Hazri is presently Executive Director of the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research at MIER. Hazri was once was the Executive Director of the Langkawi Development Authority, and before that he was with ISIS, Institute of Strategic International Studies, as a senior researcher in public policy, trained in ANU, which is Distinguished University in Australia, Australian National Area of Public Policy. So, and he's also concerned with sustainable development. So we have a good person. So we have these three speakers. So I would suggest that we do a meta organization. I will invite the three speakers to speak generally on the architecture of the budget. You feel I'll leave it up to you to take it from any angle you want. And then second round, we ask you for some specific question that relate to your skill and your area of expertise in that way. Which means Farah will be asking more on the taxation and as you hear how the budget effect of central development. And Dr. Yogi will proceed matter further. Both of us are economists, so maybe pick up some other issues, national economic management. And that sort of thing. So with that, let me start the session now. Let me give the privilege to Dr. Yogesh Varan to have his personal views, his comments on the 2020. I give you all not more than say 10 minutes. First round. Dr. Yogesh, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tan Sri, and for your pleasant remarks, and I'd also like to thank Malaysian Institute of Economic Research to invite me to share some of my thoughts on the 2022 budget. Tan Sri, certainly you will agree with me that the budget 2022 is very unprecedented. Certainly, been prepared in a crisis period, in downturns, recession, but this budget is actually given a whole host of elements has gone through, as well as the amount of pre-budget money which has been spent. Over 500 billion has been spent. So the government has been strained of funds. So it certainly would have been a very challenging task for the people in the MOF to actually design a budget that's workable and provides the needs of recovery. And I really appreciate and give shabash to them first. I think the most important thing we have to look at is how the budget has been crafted to balance between the constrained budget which they have, as well as to ensure that it's continued recovery of the economy, and to ensure that the country continues to prosper, and we are going to get back to feed, as we talk about rebooting the economy. So it's actually a very difficult task when you need to do that with constrained funds. And I think it would definitely been a very difficult decision for the government to make, where the government revenue constitutes almost 30% in terms of borrowings to fund this budget. So it's been a very challenging budget. Let me just, given the 10 minutes, let me just bring my focus on I'll have 3 observations on the budget initially. I'll do it very on the surface, then we can go into detail. My first thought is with regards to social safety net. I think the most important thing we need to realize coming out of the pandemic is that it exposed the weakness, the real weakness within our social security system or social safety net. We found that not only households, but even firms or businesses had very small margins to even wait them through more than a month. I mean, that is very, very revealing. And we also note that from figures that even to talk about post-retirement, especially when you talk about aging society, Malaysia is already becoming an aging society. And we know that DPF mentioned that almost 50% of the contributors will have only about 10,000 ringgit at the point of retirement. I mean, that is very revealing, and things have been done before we really go into a crisis situation. Of course, in the budget, as espoused in the shared, as based on the shared prosperity theme and Keluarga Malaysia, you find that everyone, the budget touches everybody. Everyone is benefiting in some form or other. You talk about very significant Keluarga Malaysia, which has been raised to 2,500 from 1,800. You talk about single parents and also specific target groups like women, like the elderly, like the children, students. Everyone has got something from the budget. But my point I wish to make at this point is, while this is highly commendable and it touches the life of so many people, I think we have reached a point where we really have to look at the social security framework in a more comprehensive and holistic manner. I believe work would have started, but I just want to press the point that if we do not do it at this point, we will be in real trouble. In fact, if you look at the social safety framework at the moment, it appears very fragmented. And for example, even what has been given in the budget appears to me addressing every target group. But have you looked at it comprehensively? Have you looked at it holistically? World Bank study says, recent World Bank study says that the social safety net in Malaysia, or even the transfers which are being done by the government, effectively is not sustainable. It's very small to actually change their lives. So I think this is something which we really need to look at. So this is one of the most important things I feel that we may have to address going forward. What I'm saying is, when you're looking about social safety net, some of the points should be considered as moving forward. One is the retirement benefits. Are they adequate to take them through? The second is with respect to the people in the informal sector. What kind of benefits? Of course, in the budget, there's some elements which talks about encouraging them to contribute to EPF, but is that sufficient, especially for people in the gig economy in that sector? So I think these are some of the things we have to consider while we begin to look at a more comprehensive social safety net. And the other thing also, you see, we looked about the multiple fronts where assistance has been given. I would think that it requires some form of coordination and consolidation so that it is more effective, outcomes are optimal, there's no leakage, there's no duplication. I think this is another area we have to consider when we are looking at a comprehensive review of the social safety net. And I think it will go a long way, as well as if we are talking about a needs-based approach, when you talk about social safety net, that will be very useful, irrespective of race, region, or any other criteria. That will be a very important step forward. While I think we should gradually migrate to that, so that we capture everyone who deserves to be assisted. My second point, Nancy, is with respect to the fiscal situation. As I said earlier, I mean, it's a very difficult time when you have a budget deficit of almost 6% and you begin to continue to borrow again to finance the budget. I think for me, it's the right to. And I think most importantly, we have to look at is look at our commitment to consolidate the budget over a period of time. I think Malaysia has demonstrated in the past that when Malaysia commits, it is able to do it. If you look at in 2009, we had, when you raked up a budget deficit of about 6.7% of GDP, and over a period of 8 years, as we committed, we brought it down to 3%. I think that kind of spirit and that kind of ability we have within the government. So that gives me some form of consolation. And although we do not find granular details of how the revenue is going to be raised over time, of course, what's consoling is we have a medium-term fiscal framework, and which talks about bringing down the budget deficit to 5% at the end of 2024. And what is more convincing is, which actually will convince the market and will bring positivity to the market, is the proposed legislation on fiscal responsibility. That's, I think, a real good step, the move, and there's also the proposal to have a budget review process with the World Bank. So these are elements, although the measures are not stated very specifically in how consolidation takes place, but I think these initiatives, the fiscal responsibility bill, and also the budget review process with the World Bank will certainly put us in the right frame and right path towards fiscal consolidation. And I think very importantly, as Nancy mentioned, it's one of the biggest budgets, certainly so, but very importantly, there's some delivery mechanisms which have been proposed in the budget. But very important, we have to ensure this money is spent well, most efficiently, optimally, so that it brings the outcomes we require. We have to avoid leakages. Our procurement process has to be top-notch, transparent, and even our delivery system has to be really improved, especially with respect to the delivery of assistance which the budget proposes to all segments of society. Because many times all these assistance come with a lot of conditions that people actually are able to assess it, and the process must be simplified. I think that's it. And my last point is with respect to the economic prospect itself. It's encouraging that we are projecting a growth of about 5.5 to 6% in the next year, and I think given the initiatives, I believe it's certainly achievable from the demand consumption side. There are a lot of initiatives which actually will provide the impetus for consumption. There's also pent-up demand. So the consumption part is taken care of in terms of direct transfers, and also many initiatives to re-employ people. The target is to go back to full employment next year, 4%. I think that the initiatives there are in place. And we talk about the wage subsidies, and we talk about the assistance to SMEs, which is being continued over the period. That's a very important move. My fear was that we would take the assistance off as we recover, but I think this is very important because you still need to give them the assistance so that there's a time for them to rehabilitate. And so the government continues to assist them while they rehabilitate. So these are good things. And if we talk about investments, the public investments will continue. And if you look at the DE, we are looking at one of the biggest DE, and in fact, the biggest DE so far we have seen, the development expenditure. And We also have projects, investment projects, public sector infrastructure projects, and big projects are going to continue, such as the Pan Borneo, the LRT3, MRT3. I mean, these are big ticket projects, and this will actually help to spur employment and generate income in the economy. So therefore, I see the, and also the ramping up of the digital economy is also very important. These are some of the elements which are going to see us through to achieving the 5.5 and 6 to 6.5%. So I'm very positive that we should be able to achieve that, of course, barring the downsides, which we all very well know. I'll stop at that, Tan Sri. Thank you so much.
Before I invite Puan Farah, let me remind viewers that the webinar is live from Zoom and Facebook. You can refer to facebook.com/mier.org and .my. And recording of the webinar will also be uploaded in our YouTube channel, MIER channel. Thank you very much, Dr. Yogis. Let me now invite Puan Farah to give her comments on the budget, especially maybe from the financing angle, taxation, that sort of thing in particular, and also maybe that's expenditure. Okay, Farah, it's yours.
Thank you so much, Tan Sri Chairman. And thank you to Malaysian Institute of Economic Research for having me here this morning. And, and also seated with Dr. Yogis and Dr. Hezri, fellow panelists. So, I call this economic chat, and I'm by nature a tax person. So I'll see what tax and economy, yes, there is a relation. So, what I will be focusing on precisely, Tan Sri, is more on the tax side. Salam sejahtera, very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So when we look at budget 2022, it poses balanced measures to strengthen recovery, and even our topic today is on recovery, economic recovery, right? And building resilience and drive reforms. Yeah. And the tax proposals announced align to encourage economic growth, and that's what I'm seeing. And this is the principle and the intent behind budget 2022. And there's also significant focus on funding healthcare. In fact, that's the highest allocation, 50 over billion. And education sectors, I can't remember, I think it's about 20 over billion on education sectors. And also the reskilling and upskilling of the workforce and future talent to meet industry demands. And I'm a strong proponent of skills and talent, because for the businesses to be successful, having the right talents and skill is very important. And the economic landscape and the way business is conducted is so varied now, and it's very different than where we were 20 years ago. The talent and the knowledge of new ways of doing businesses, new ways of running a factory, new automation of processes, all that requires continuous learning and continuous updating of knowledge of the people. I recollect Dr. Yogis mentioned earlier about digitalization, the gig economy and all that, and those were not even heard of 2 decades ago. Yeah. And there was also focus on technology as well as digital in the budget 2022 proposals. And all this, I would say, would be very important as you move towards recovery and pull the economy up in closing and also becoming stronger post the pandemic. Yeah. And I cannot help to cover the tax aspects of the budget 2022 proposals, as I mentioned earlier. In total, there were various tax proposals covering amendments to the relevant acts. Yeah. And total there were 86 changes to the tax proposals. And if you look at the government revenue, so we have the expenditure and we have the revenue. And for 2021, and we are only left with 6 weeks of 2021, yeah, the revenue is 221 billion. Yeah, this year revenue is 232 billion for next year, I mean 2022 coming. Yeah, and the tax revenue target for 2021 is expected to be 162 billion, which is 10.3% of GDP. Yeah, and what is that percentage? Yeah, of that 20 billion out of the government's revenue? That is 73%. So can you imagine a huge chunk of the government's revenue is actually relying a lot on tax, and and out of that, direct tax comprised of 54% of that government revenue. So that's a huge chunk, and the balance, of course, 20% is indirect tax. So the likes of SST, customs, excise, etc. Yeah, and as I've mentioned, for 2022 next year, the government's revenue target is 234 billion. And so what I can expect in 2022, there will not be any lesser of the 120 billion target, tax revenue collection target for 2021. Yeah. So there will be quite a lot of pressure on tax revenue and introducing new taxes, perhaps maybe, or new ways of collecting taxes, because there is a high reliance on taxes to help fill up the government's coffer. Yeah. But then again, we all know now, no more surprise, right? We're all guessing whether there's going to be new taxes, windfall taxes, wealth taxes coming in. People were very, very concerned whether there's going to be any taxes. Well, there was no new taxes as announced in budget 2022, but there were some very surprising proposals or measures that was announced. Yeah, I mean, we were speculating it's coming, whether it's coming in or whether it's not coming in, but it came. And I would like to mention two. One is the exemption on foreign source income. So we know then that the exemption on foreign source, Malaysia has an exemption on foreign source income, and this has been lifted. And this has been there since the 90s, late 90s. And in 2004, the government actually, in a way, changed the law and include a certain paragraph in the Income Tax Act to allow any sort of foreign source income remitted to Malaysia to be exempted. And that is no longer available from 1/1/2022. Yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know whether in the next 6 weeks, 7 weeks, there's going to be lots of remittance of money to Malaysia because people do not want to be taxed come 1/1/2022. Well, if there's cash inflows, then maybe that's good. But maybe there's also going to be a negative impact because people will be worried and not remitting the money because of these new tax that's coming in. And what happened to Malaysian competitiveness with our neighboring countries? As we know, Singapore has a sort of foreign source income exemption in Singapore. Hong Kong has that. So will this impact the attractiveness of Malaysia? That's a question I have. As a holding company jurisdiction, right? Will this hamper future investment decisions? Well, we got to see that, what will happen to that. And this is in relation to all sorts of income. It can be dividend income, it can be interest income, it can be even be employment income. If you're a Malaysian resident, you remit money back to Malaysia from 1/1/2022, there will be tax. But of course, there's tax credit that you can claim. But of course, Malaysian tax is 24% as compared to our neighboring countries, 17% in Singapore, 16% in Hong Kong. Definitely, there will be net increase in taxes for Malaysia. So people are asking me, how much is this? How much revenue is government going to collect from this foreign source income exemption? Various speculations. What I'm seeing and what I'm listening and what I'm reading is about 3 billion ringgit additional taxes. But if you net it off against the credits that's going to be given back to the country because there shouldn't be any double taxation, then maybe the net impact is only half of that, maybe, I don't know. Yeah. So is this extra 1 billion to 2 billion worth, will it impact what I call it behaviors in terms of to making Malaysia as an attractive investment destination? The second one is Cukai Makmur, right? Prosperity tax, and everybody is talking about taxing larger corporations, and that has come in, and there is now a Cukai Makmur prosperity tax, which means then that for larger corporations, I say in simple, not using any tax technical jargon, and if you have profits above 100 million, that income above 100 million will be taxed at 33%. Yeah, instead of the normal tax of 24%. Anything extra, that will be 33% instead of 24%. So I did a back of the envelope calculation. And what does that mean? For a company that has chargeable income, or to make it easy, profits of 150 million, they will end up paying extra 4.5 million ringgit taxes. Yeah, because of this 33% additional tax, Cukai Makmur. Yeah, and the spirit, I understand, is actually to have this extra revenue for the spending that the government has had over the last many months of pandemic. But will this actually impact again behaviors? Yeah, and it is only once off. It's only for year of assessment 2022. So would that mean then that businesses will perhaps delay making super profits in 2022 and push that profits to 2023 when the tax rate is lower? I don't know. Will these drive that kind of behavior? Yeah. The other 2 points I'd like to touch just very quickly is on diversity and inclusiveness. I must say this because I'm the only lady here in this panel. And there was also the announcement that to encourage diversity and inclusiveness, it was proposed that public listed companies on Bursa to be mandated to have to appoint at least one woman to the board. And and that's a welcome move. And I hope this is not just a one woman requirement, yeah, because of the minimum of one woman. But studies have shown that companies with diverse boards actually perform better. Yeah, so I'm also a supporter of diversity and inclusiveness. And the last point is on sustainability. Yeah, we are tomorrow is the last day of the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, right, which is ending tomorrow. And in line with nation's commitment to become a carbon neutral nation by 2050, there were also some measures, right, on ESG, we call it sustainability, and there's an establishment of a platform by Bursa under the voluntary carbon market to facilitate the trading of carbon credits among owners of green assets. There is also introduction of the 1 billion low carbon transition facility by Bank Negara, and there's also full import duty excise duty sales tax exemption on EVs, on electric vehicles. So maybe it's time to buy electric vehicles for many of you, because there's exemption, and that will hopefully drive the price of the cars down. And there's also some individual tax relief up to 2,500 ringgit for various measures relating to electric vehicles. Yeah. So thank you, Tan Sri, back to you.
Thank you, Puan Farah. Very good analysis on the tax. And I'm sure the question from the floor, especially on the two taxes you mentioned. Let me now invite Dr. Hezri Anand, our MIER Executive Director, for his remark on the budget. Hezri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tan Sri Chairman, Tan Sri Sulaiman. Greetings to my fellow panelists, Dr. Yoges and also Puan Farah Rosli. Very interesting points have already been raised, and I just like to take on the invitation by Tan Sri to say a few things about the architecture of the budget. I think just to echo what Dr. Yoges had said earlier, that of course this is an expansionary budget, and it is not an enviable job on the part of our counterparts in MOF. Balancing revenue and expenditure post-COVID is not an easy business, but I think they've done well in trying to have something for a little bit of everything or something for everyone. And for this, I think some people has referred to the budget 2022 as a feel-good budget. The naughtier ones among us referred to it as an election budget. So call it what you may, but the OPEX, or the operating expenditure, has to increase about 6.3%. And a big jump can be seen in the allocation for development expenditure, about 21.9%. And this is very welcoming. But of course, the worrying part is in the revenue side, which is set to increase about 6%. And Puan Farah has flagged a number of challenges associated with that target. And then, of course, the financing of the budget itself is a challenge. Of course, as of end of June 2021, our debt has reached almost 960 billion ringgit. And by back of envelope calculation, it will definitely reach 1 trillion Malaysian ringgit by sometime mid of next year. So this is, of course, not sustainable, but of course this is an exceptional budget. I think government is looking, and we hope government will be doing more to look at the how to address the OPEX that's been on the increase for quite some years now. In fact, if you combine the emoluments and pensions being paid to civil service, plus the debt that we have to shoulder, that amounts to more than 60% of the budget. And so that leaves a little kind of a small space to do something. But nevertheless, there's our friends in Putrajaya, particularly Ministry of Finance, managed to carve out goodies for many segments of society. But this question of growing OPEX is really an issue, because if you look at just to take three allocations for three ministries, Higher Education Ministry, the Education Ministry, and also the Health Ministries. If you combine the three, they amount to about 99.5 billion ringgit, which is about 30% of the overall budget. But education, higher education, about 79%, would go to OPEX. So that's very high. That's already well known. And then similarly with Health Ministry, 39% is allocated for DE and 54% for emoluments. So this is the kind of challenge that the government is facing. There was a commentary yesterday by one of the member of parliaments that maybe government servants should be given option to retire at age 40, because there's a lot of debate to that, whether that will incur more costs or, but these are the kind of hard questions that the government has got to observe in the forthcoming years. Secondly is the question of sustainability, which Farah has raised. I thought I'd just like to flag one point here, which is the allocation for or on ecological fiscal transfer amounting to 70 million ringgit for the state government. And this is a very, very good, decision on the part of government. The government started offering this in 2019, and now there's a commitment to make it an annual sort of allocation for the states to protect biodiversity and enhance conservation efforts. But of course, the devil is in the details. There is yet to be a mechanism being put forth on how the agencies or the players within the state authorities to access this fund, because this, 70 million, maybe it goes about 5 million plus for each state, which is a big sum of money for conservation effort, but they will go straight into the state coffer. There is no distinction that this can only be used for conservation purposes. This is the same case with the cess money or cess allocation from timber logging or from logging activities that go straight into state coffer. By right, it is supposed to be used for silvicultural or replanting of trees, but again, there is no clear distinction, mechanism being put forth. So this is the question of implementation, and for this fund to reach the target and the outcomes that we want, I think the mechanism needs to be spelled out as we move forward. But the allocation itself is very welcoming, and I'm sure many parties who are, there's a greater demand for sustainability in this country in recent years. So this is a welcome move, definitely. And my third point is on the, on the emphasis on outcomes. In this day and age, everything's just, a matter of click, and people want to know how money is being spent. Years back, Tan Sri Chairman may remember, your guest, there was a unit in EPU, or the Economic Plan Unit, called Socio-Economic Research Unit, or SERU. And this unit was given the function to do evaluation. So I think up to 1990, before it was, discontinued, they've already taken more than 50 evaluative studies, which are very important in knowing not just how money is being spent, but whether we have spent it well, in terms of how the project was delivered and all that. I think this evaluation function needs to be resurrected, not necessarily within only the confine of public service, but maybe a function that can be shared with among the think tanks in Malaysia, MIER and a few others, can shoulder some of this burden. And I think this is where the public can also have a more nuanced understanding of how difficult it is to implement projects. And maybe this is pretty much in keeping with the spirit of, I think there's a word we use, a whole of nation approach. I think if there is enough information being put forth on how the projects are being implemented, more parties can come in. And I would just stop there first, Tan Sri, and look forward to more exchange in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azri. Let me come back to Dr. Yogesh. It's a question of reform in the public finance. You talk about the Fiscal Responsibility Act. You talk about the fiscal budget review processes, that sort of thing. And this led to the level of debt management mentioned by Azri just now. I think, what do you think that this is one very very important area that the Ministry of Finance should be, looking into in the years to come. Fiscal reform, Well, you have any view on that? Actually, in terms of trying to constrain the debt increases and all this. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Tan Sri. If I can say something.
Yes.
Thank you, Tan Sri. I think it's a very important thing to address. Basically, you are coming out from a budget, which is, in fact, if you look at the structure of the budget, I think the debt borrowing is actually pretty high. As I said, almost 30% of the financing of the budget comes from debt, from borrowing. And we actually at a very critical stage. But nonetheless, I said that, I mean, this has to be done. But the most important thing is we have to be committing ourselves to real consolidation. And in that respect, the Fiscal Responsibility Act is very important, basically because you look at fiscal consolidation in a very comprehensive manner, just not in terms of expenditure and revenue, but also debt levels and how we borrow and how we spend. So the revenue aspect is being looked at, and also the expenditure aspect is looked at in a more comprehensive manner. Because when we look at consolidation properly, I mean, we never look at it so comprehensively. But this Fiscal Responsibility Act will do that. And beyond that, it will also allow for a lot of transparency. People begin to know, and there can be a lot of accountability which comes from that particular act. So it is actually a very, for me, it's a game-changing move, where the government is more open to discussion, more open to transparency, more open to accountability. And also the budget review by the World Bank. There have been previous occasions where the budget review has been done by World Bank, and they actually came up with very important suggestions. One of them was basically the fiscal framework, the medium-term fiscal framework, which came up in the last budget review by the World Bank. So certainly we can look forward to see some very important recommendations, proposals coming through. But more importantly, it should be a commitment on the part of the government to implement those proposals. That's very important. And so again, when you talk about the public sector, I can't help but touch on the revenue. And actually, I was looking forward, while we had, as Ms. Farah has raised all the tax initiatives, and some of them which were really unexpected, and some of them, could have other views and other expectations, negative, and some of them can be positive. I totally agree with that. But I thought there was avenue to look at the indirect taxes. I mean, indirect taxes to me at 20% is still pretty low, And I think one of the biggest mistakes we made along the way was to abort the GST prematurely. It's an aborted child. I look at it that way. I mean, there's fantastic initiatives and so much effort was done, but it is aborted. And I thought it is timely to revisit that, and that will actually broaden the tax base. It's more efficient tax, and it's a fairer tax system. And certainly, when we saw the GST, the revenues actually went up. Maybe I know our colleagues in MOF would have thought about it, and it was a very hard decision to balance between taxing the people, and at this point of time, because imposing a tax there's never a right time to impose a tax. Put it that way, and especially with the political scenario where we are, and maybe a difficult decision. But I would see that there has to be real consideration on going back to a more broad-based tax, value tax. And I was thinking that start with something neutral, where you don't have to increase the actual amount of tax, but set the system right. I think we are ready. I think most of the companies are ready. People have been so used to the GST, So I think going back to that, and of course addressing some of the shortcomings in this implementation the last time with respect to reimbursement on timely basis to the companies. I think that's very important. So if we can tackle those shortcomings, I think we are done. I think there's some serious consideration should be given to that. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Let me come back to Puan Farah. You touched the tax matters now. You touched about the prosperity tax, touched about the income exemption of the income from abroad. A good friend of mine, MIER, is Dr. Veranjit Singh. I'm sure you know him. He's well known for the indirect taxes area. He was talking about harmonization between service tax and service tax and sales tax to raise some revenue here and there. Do you have any views on this? How can we harmonize this to Puan Farah? I know you're a tax specialist.
Thank
Please.
you. Thank you, Tan Sri. Yeah, my view is then that the tax raising measures is definitely necessary to narrow the budget deficit, because we are talking about this pressure. Dr. Yogi spoke about, bringing back GST maybe. And the proposals that we have in budget 2022, I think may not significantly contribute to the tax revenue to the country. Yeah. And there are other ways of doing this. And one of them, Tan Sri, you're right, harmonizing direct indirect taxes, maybe that's one. There's also a need to, I would say, formulate longer term measures that will generate sustainable growth for the country. And what I mean by saying this is that there is also a way to transform and digitalize the tax administration system. Currently, there's one thing. First is the GST, harmonization of the direct indirect taxes. Yes, but what about shadow economy? Yeah, study shows that there's about 18% of the economy is shadow economy. So there is also the revenue that's actually sitting in there. And one way of looking at this is to consider digitalizing the tax administration and the tax framework. Automation, exchange of information between tax authorities, which is already happening now. We have this foreign exchange information. And also, what about among authorities, among other agencies and regulators in the country, the financial institutions? We're all talking about data. We're all talking about artificial intelligence. And I think this will go a long way because studies have shown that countries that have pursued digital tax administration have also managed to increase significantly their tax revenue. One of the countries I can quote is Mexico and Brazil. They have actually started with e-invoicing. Yep. So they have a VAT system and they have also a direct tax system. And what they did was is what I would call a live capturing of that income. Right. Say for example, if you have a tuition teacher receiving money, the money goes into their bank account, and that bank account, and normally, for ignorance or for any other reason, this money is not being declared. Or rental income, for example, a person has got multiple sources of revenue and they may not have actually from rental and they may not have declared this. But once you have e-invoicing and it's all recorded within the system, the revenue can be captured. And that was what GST was aiming to work towards, to have automated capturing of tax revenue, tax data on live. And but then again, it came with some issues, right? Dr. Yogis has said precisely the refund mechanism was far from efficient. So that caused cash flow issues for businesses, and people are definitely unhappy about it. And of course, you're right, Tan Sri. One is the direct tax, which is governed by the IRB, and the other would be the indirect taxes as governed by customs. Maybe there could be further collaboration between the two to see where where further revenue can be captured. GST was trying to work towards that, but now with SST, it is not consumption tax like GST. So there are gaps. Definitely, there are gaps there.
Thank you, Puan Farah. I think in the interest of time, I'd like to go into the some of the questions raised by the floor. Sorry, Ezri, maybe we'll address the questions some of them raised from the chat box. One question is that it appears that the middle income group, M40, has been neglected. The top 20, maybe they can take care of themselves, but the bottom 40, the government has given a lot of transfers to them, as mentioned by Dr. Yogi just now. But the middle income group seems to be affected. This is quite concerned. I wonder whether Hezri wanted to comment on that. Many of us happen to be in that group. Hezri, the middle income group, what do you call it now?
Thank you, Tan Sri Chairman. Yeah. Definitely, the emphasis on the M40 group is not as clear cut as the B40 group, and this has been raised a lot in the media and some of the webinars as well. So because of the lockdown, some of the members of the M40 has actually slipped down to belong to the B40 or the B60 groups, and people say there's 10%, even 20% slip into the lower category. And this group is, I would also agree with some of the claims that there's not enough being being sort of allocated for them, and they have to deal with issue of mortgage and all that, which has not been properly addressed. And I think this is perhaps one item that the government should be fine as we move along, and also in a subsequent budget, I think. Thank you, Tan Sri.
No, I'm sorry, there's some glitches in our system in MIER here. The question raised by Dato' August, the question of a social safety net, is quite a concern. But in that context, also a lot of expenditure given to the public healthcare system. I wonder whether our participants here think, what is the possibility of having a good national health insurance? You can contribute to something like MediSave or something like that, so that it can help the upkeep of our national public health care system. Is very important, especially our experience from the pandemic COVID-19. Okay, this question is open to you all. Anybody would like to pick up on this? Having a national health insurance in China. Dato', do you have any comment on this? Dato' Yogis or even Farah?
I think certainly national health insurance is something which the government has been considering for some time now. As you know, in fact, the pandemic actually exposed some of the weaknesses, but I think we came out quite well relative to many other countries. And I think when you look at the pandemic, it is, I would say, it's a real outlier. And I think we addressed it quite well. And when you talk about the national health insurance, I think this is something which we can seriously consider, and it has been the cards of the government for some time. This will actually be very useful. In fact, one thing is it gives equity in the sense that it gives better access and equitable access to medical care for all, even the B40. Because for now, B40, the access to medical health care cannot be as it is very differentiated from person from top 20. But we have this kind of insurance, then it reduces the gap of the accessibility to equitable healthcare. I think that in that context, this should be considered. But I think the issue of social safety net is to be much bigger than that. I mean, health is a very important aspect, but beyond that, social migration, the livability. We talk about no more. We have reached a stage where we do not talk about poverty line income. Poverty line income is something which is important, but I think we have to talk about becoming a developed country. We should talk about living income. So we have to talk about social safety net in that context.
Sorry, thank you. I'd like to ask Puan Farah on your view of having a contribution scheme or saving scheme in the form of national health insurance. What do you think, Puan Farah?
Yeah. I think, Tan Sri, overall is also the cost or the affordability of the healthcare itself. I think that's one area that needs to be looked at. Having and I always look at the how much allocation can be given for healthcare, but I think most importantly is also the spending. How well is it being spent? Is it being spent on the right resources? We had issues with contract medical officers, where they're not able to be absorbed into the healthcare industry. I think that is an area that needs to be looked at. Already we are talking about shortage of medical healthcare workers, and also many of them are actually having struggles mentally as well with the kind of work. Their own wellness is also another important factor that needs to be looked at. So I will always say that, budget is important. Yes, it is 32 billion now. I've got the number 32 billion for healthcare that was allocated, but we call it perbelanjaan berhemah also is needed, Tan Sri. And
Yes.
Having an insurance scheme is good in the sense and that it allows that comfort. You pay for X amount of insurance and you are expected to be able to actually use it if touch wood something happens, right? But again, I go back to the affordability of the healthcare system itself. Soon you'll be maximizing the insurance, right? In no time, if the cost of getting healthcare is just too high.
Let me ask another very specific question. Thank you, Farah, on that. Because of the breakdown in the world supply chain, global supply chain, many of products, goods, services cannot reach in time. I just saw on TV, in some ports there's a lot of what you call overcrowding kind of thing, so this has increased the cost of movement of goods, services, logistics, that sort of thing. And this may create some inflation in the domestic economy, especially we import a lot of things, even our food, 20 billion a year. We think that inflation is a concern and should be addressed in this budget. Dr. Yogesh, you are a macroeconomist. Cost of production has gone up, cost of transport has gone up, logistics gone up. So, yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Yogesh, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Tan Sri. If you look at the figures on inflation, I just missed that point. I believe they are looking at the moderation of inflation. I think the issue of logistics is something which will not be long term. I think this is the issue of some hitches with respect to people coming back to work and getting people re-employed in the logistics sector. I think that will be resolved. But I will see that going in, inflation will actually moderate, and inflation may not really be an issue at least in the short term.
Okay, Puan Farah, you have 2 minutes. This for wrap-up session now.
Wrap-up session.
Yeah. Only 1 hour somehow rather.
Yeah.
So jealous of us. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I would say then that I think it's good to have a tax reform a map, perhaps a journey in terms of where we are heading. It could be automation, digitalization of the tax administration system. We look at all our fiscal measures, look at where we can actually raise further revenue, but at the same time encouraging economic growth. I think one bit that's lacking also, Tan Sri, is when we talk about FDIs. Nothing much has been actually mentioned in the budget 2022 on how are we going to attract FDIs, and we all know the impact of FDIs on the economy can be very, very good in terms of talent, skills, workforce, as well as the economic chain reaction from inflow of FDI.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm really jealous of us. Okay, let me give a chance to Dr. Yogesh. You have 2 minutes, Dr. Yogesh, to wrap up and say something.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Let me go back to your point about inflation. I mean, if you go back to the budget, it looks at inflation moderating about 2.1%. I think basically because you see that many of the issues with respect to supply chain, as you talked about, and we also see that they actually, I think adjust their forecast with respect to moderation of inflation. I think inflation will not really be an issue with respect to Malaysia at least for the next years, because I think the same thing is going to take. Although we are a big importer of intermediate products and consumption products, we also don't see important inflation taking shape over the time. But my only point, Tan Sri, on the last point I want to make is, while we have a good budget at hand, of course, it's very easy for us to actually poke holes of the budget fabric, but I think in total it's a good budget. I think more important is to see that it's delivered, because many times, although they have some monitoring mechanisms which are set in place, it's very important to see that it's delivered on time and effectively. And especially when you talk about government spending, we'd like to see greater transparency and greater prudence in expenditure. And I think that is very, very important. I think the delivery mechanism is now what they have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very important point on the implementation delivery. Let me invite Dr. Hazri. You have a few minutes to say.
Thank you, Tan Sri Chairman. I just like to comment on the inflation rate. The headline inflation rate is on the rise everywhere in the world, but somehow in Malaysia, despite what's the awful things happening out there, we've managed to sort of it was only at a moderate level. And in our recent MIER recent economic outlook, we are actually quite optimistic that it will be improved. The situation will be improved in the next few months, and as we go into 2020, now that the economy is back in action. But on the other point is on sustainability. I think again, whatever the government has promised in the budget is very welcoming. The electric vehicles and then the 450 million allocation for biodiversity and environmental protection is also very much welcome. But we need to look closely at the implementation. And this is where I think a whole of nation approach is necessary. And for that to happen, more transparency on the part of government. I think we are moving to the right direction. We have a pre-budget statement being released. And I think if the government is, continue pushing on transparency, more people, more sectors, more players will be more than keen to come into action together with the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hazri. I must thank all our participants and also our fellow panelists. They have been very forthcoming, in terms of analyzing the components and the budget proposal, that sort of thing. I'd like to say that we in MIER would actually like to contribute also to the government in terms of trying to improve the implementation, trying to improve the some of the aerial reforms where we can work together with the government. We are a friend of the government, MIER. So some other issues, and maybe also we like to work together with some accounting firms to look at some potential areas like national health insurance, how the government needs to, as Dr. Yoga said, this is a long-term that has been discussed for so long, but results are not out yet. So I think with that remark, I must thank all the participants and all the panelists for have been very good in the analysis of the budget, and I'm sure people in the Treasury are listening to us and they take some of these comments very positively and get them further studied. MIER is too happy to work with them. Thank you, Dr. Yogesh. Thank you, Puan Farah. Thank you, Dr. Hazri, for your very good remarks. Thank you again. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you again. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.